You have been a prosecutor. You've been involved, I'm sure, in immunity grants. What is the fact that immunity has been reportedly given to the CFO of the Trump organization, a man named Weisselberg, as well as reportedly to David Pecker, the publisher of the National Enquirer, a close confidant of the president? What does that tell us, if anything, about what's going on?
Well, it says that, number one, what it's important to remember, getting an immunity agreement, getting an immunity order is the gold standard. No prosecutor gives somebody immunity without thinking long and hard about it because of the consequences of giving somebody immunity. And it actually is a hard process. You have to go through a lot of steps. For a grant of immunity, you need U.S. attorney approval. You need also approval from DOJ main justice. So it means that whatever the testimony these two individuals have to offer to the government thinks it's very important because the case they have to make to the U.S. attorney, and here it's actually, I believe, Rob Khuzami as the deputy U.S. attorney because Jeff Berman is recused, they have to say why it's important, why they can't get that information anywhere else, the relative culpability of the people you're going to give immunity to versus the people you're investigating. So that also implies that there is criminal exposure. And also, again, it's the public interest, why it's so important.
So, Greg, as far as we know, is this part of the Southern District U.S. Attorney's investigation as opposed to the Mueller investigation? There are two separate investigations here, because when it got to Mr. Cohen, President Trump's former lawyer, it got turned over to the Southern District.
Yes, and although it's not clear, there's been no announcement about this, I think we can infer this is coming out of the Southern District because it's a follow-on, it's a continuation of the, basically the guilty plea that Michael Cohen entered into on Tuesday. And yes, just a second, what Khan said, you make an inference, I presume we're making an inference that if someone's getting immunity, A, they have something very valuable, and B, their own lawyer asked for the immunity because they themselves might have some exposure.
But the Cohen original investigation had to do with the payoffs just for Stormy Daniels and another woman to be quiet about an alleged relationship with President Trump. Is that enough to warrant all this investigation, Con? I mean, is that really? There's a sense of proportionality, I assume, for prosecutors to say, okay, maybe something was done that was wrong, but it's not worth all this.
There is, and you're absolutely right, David, that there's a concept of prosecutorial discretion, but when it involves potentially corruption at the highest levels, so it could just be a small crime, but committed by people at high levels of power, you're going to do it because of the deterrent effect, and also about what that says to people lower down the, like let's say it was a police commissioner and he commits a small crime. You have to prosecute that because it'll send a message to the officers on the line that you can't do that. And something I think that is important to note also is grants of immunity are procedure specific. So this grant of immunity, you're absolutely right, is only with respect to the Cohen investigation. If they want to get immunity for these individuals in some other proceeding, something related, they're going to have to go back and do it again and get approval.
At some point, presumably, these investigations are going to go quiet because we have an election coming up. And there's, as I understand it, Department of Justice regulation that says you can't get too close in time to an election. So when is that? When will this go quiet?
It's not a written regulation. There's not a specific time period. But what it is, it's a policy that says don't do anything that might influence the political process. And U.S. attorneys and prosecutors have taken that to mean 60 days, approximately, before an election. You're not going to say anything or do anything that could potentially be seen as influencing an election.
So, Greg, talking about the political process, let's talk about the Attorney General of the United States, yes. Jeff Sessions, and his boss, the President of the United States. Extraordinary set of exchanges here with the President saying he never had control of the Justice Department. Yeah. Jeff Sessions saying you can't influence me politically, and then President Trump coming back and saying, okay, fine, then go after the Democrats.
Right. This is extraordinary. We've sort of left, terra firma, and now we're in terra incognita, if you will. It's a very strange circumstance. Ironically, a lot of people 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, when Jeff Sessions was appointed, people in blue states were, appalled at the idea. And he is the one who's actually holding up, rule of law and embracing the standard for which the Justice Department stands.
So, having worked in the Justice Department, in the U.S. Attorney's Office, what does this do to the men and women who work in that department every day when they see their boss, the Attorney General, seemingly at war with the President of the United States? What does that do to their job when they come into the office of the day and have to prosecute a new case?
it's terrible for morale. Terrible for morale to see this going on, playing out in the public sphere like that. But at the same time, I think it was commendable of Attorney General Sessions to say what he did, to say what's the truth is DOJ attorneys take an oath to represent the United States and the Constitution, and they're not going to be influenced by politics. So I think that actually boosts morale, much like what Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein said, I think several months ago, when he said he's not going to be extorted by threats.
So, Greg, finally, why is the president doing this? I mean, he could just fire him. He could call Jeff Sessions up and say, sorry, you serve at my pleasure, and I'm not pleased.
I don't have any pipeline to the White House, but I'm sure he's getting advice from people he trusts, probably even from Rudy Giuliani, that you can't fire him now. 2 months before an election, this would just be almost like an admission of guilt. You've got to wait. And that's why the signals yesterday from Lindsey Graham, et cetera, that down the road, after the election, we might be willing to consider this, I think, are important.
Okay, fascinating. Thank you so much.